So if all goes according to plan and I don't just suck, this should boot up today. So it's come to my attention that some of you are questioning my admiration for aquatic vessels with ballistic armament. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's true. All of it. In fact, it's so true I have teamed up with World of Warships to bring you today's video. World of Warships is known as the thinking man's strategy game, where you get to take some of the most iconic vessels from World War I and World War II and take them straight into battle. Vessels like the USS Texas, the USS Arizona, or naval legends like the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. And there's even lonely vessels that are just waiting for a captain like you, like my personal favorite, the Tier 4 Clemson Destroyer. In fact, you can start commanding your very own fleet by using my link in the description below to get a bonus starter pack that's got 3 days of premium time, 300 doubloons, a USS Langley aircraft carrier, and 1 million credits. Speaking of aircraft carriers, not only do you get to control the ship, you get to control your flight squadrons, carrying out attacks like rocket attacks, torpedo attacks, and bombing runs to devastate your enemy. Don't be as devastated as these lonely ships waiting for captains. Give them a home, then use offer code PLAYLANGLY2019 while clicking my link in the description below. So obviously we've gotten some stuff done on this since the last video, and I decided when it comes to the tubing and the runs, I would just take the time to do it and show you what we came up with. I've showed this enough in the past, and this is a simple enough setup to where I think just a basic explanation should suffice, hopefully. Now, if you notice at the top, you'll see we did end up with a radiator up there, and that's because a user whose name currently escapes me, and I feel bad for that. He was like, Jay, not only can you in fact fit a top rad, you can also fit a rear rad as well, because he has 360 on the top. I think he has a 240 on the top, or 360 in the front, 240 on the top, 120 in the rear. Obviously, we're not doing a 120 rear, but I stole this idea right here of bringing the fittings around and going in front of the rad to bring the piping around. I stole that completely 100% from his picture. So you get all the credit for this, because I did not think of this. And I said it in the previous video that you guys send me pictures and you show me that your creativity is like 10 times better than mine when it comes to overcoming some of these obstacles. So I'm kind of proud that we have such an amazing audience following this channel that I can learn from. So that's exactly where that came from, and I'll probably use this technique in the future. But when it comes to tubing, here is our run. So we're coming out of the pump res combo into a 90-degree fitting, into another 90 right here, into a 90 bend, into the GPU. From the GPU, we're coming out with a 90 bend into a fitting into the CPU, out of the CPU into the rad, and then out of the rad into the other rad, back up and then down into the top of the reservoir into the push-down tube. Now, what you might notice is there's no bends here that are more than a 90. So we've got a 90 here, 90 here, 90 there, and 90 there. Because I had limited tubing to do this, anytime you have to do 2 bends in a single run, if it's not absolutely perfect, it really gets on my nerves. And so I bend over and over and over again, and I didn't want to waste tubing. So the other thing is I looked at it this way. I'm like, with the exception of adding 2 fittings right here, we were able to simplify our loop by just doing a single 90, which we just cut to the right lengths to get it where we need it. And then this 90-degree fitting, putting us right into the other fitting that we're connecting to. So here it's just a 90, here it's the same thing, a 90 into the fitting, pushing the tube right into the CPU. So I did that for a couple reasons. 1, laziness. First and foremost, laziness, but it looks good. 2, to kind of show you that for a couple of extra bucks right here, you could save yourself a lot of headache. This saves so much time, and we still think fits along with the whole Dark Knight theme of being kind of like mechanically looking, I guess, techie, mechanical, whatever. So what we have to do today is a few things. 1, we're gonna put the Dominator Platinum RAM in here, the RGB RAM. We do have our cables now from Cablemod, which we were waiting on to continue this series. And you can see we kept this very Batman-like. If you look at the colors on this, we've got black, we've got gray, and we've got carbon. This carbon is sort of like a shiny black, if that makes sense. It's kind of more of a gunmetal-y look. And as soon as you kind of put it in the system right there, you can see it sort of ties in that kind of a black military-esque feel of the whole Batman theme. So I'm glad I went with this color choice. I really sat there for a while on their configurator playing with the different colors, trying to figure out how I wanted this to work. But that's the nice thing about the Cablemod configurator. And yes, they are a sponsor of this build and this channel. And so if you guys want to go up there to their Cablemod configurator, you can play around with the different colors and kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like before you go ahead and place the order. We went with the premium combs, so these are aluminum anodized, and then it is the Pro kit, so it has a thicker wire in there. But the build, unfortunately, is not going to be staying together full time. It is something we wanted to build to test out some of the new X570 stuff from MSI. So obviously we're taking a look at the Godlike, which is the best board that they make. We're taking a look also at the 5700 XT water-cooled. And then obviously all of the Corsair HydraX water cooling stuff. Everything in here is Corsair HydraX, so it gave us an opportunity to see what that's like to build with. And so unfortunately the build won't stay together full time. But that doesn't mean we're not gonna still finish it. So we showed you in part 1 that we're using the MP600 because it's a PCIe Gen 4 SSD. So we'll be able to test the M.2 performance on X570, which should get us pretty close to 5 gigabytes per second if we don't deal with throttling or anything. So it does have a cover that has a thermal pad that touches this, so we'll see how that performs. If you're concerned about temperatures though, MSI does include this Expander Z Gen 4 expansion card, which holds 2 M.2s, has active cooling, actually has a fan switcher here, you can control the fan. It's got, you can hook up lights to it, so you know when the drive's doing something. And you've also got a 6-pin PCI Express power cable, which we just think, oh my God, why do you need 6-pin for your M.2? But whatever, I digress. Maybe there's enough power draw from these that we're not aware of, but it does come with this card. And the reason why we're not using it though is because as you can see, it's taller than the slot height. This is about the height of a custom graphics card, but unfortunately where I have my tube, this can't fit behind it. But that's a little overkill for what we're doing here. But if your goal with your build is for ultimate input-output of your drive, there is this. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm just gonna take a picture of the loop so I remember where all the tubes and stuff were, because what I've gotta do now.
Because yesterday you cut the wrong tube?
Yeah, I did. I cut this bend thinking it was scrap and used it on this bend, and I was like, yeah, I'm done. And then I was like, oh man. So anyway, what I gotta do now is I gotta take out all these tubes, and now that I have a picture showing where they all are, we now need to paint them. I'm not gonna paint the reservoir because I don't wanna commit it to always being non-transparent. I'm gonna use it in different builds and stuff, and I don't want it to always just be completely blacked out with that strip that we were gonna tape off, because you never know where this is gonna end up in the future. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going over these pipes with some 1500 just to make sure anything on the surface is gone. And then what we're gonna do is we've gotta come up with some way to stand these up so that when I paint them, they're not laying down, because obviously that's a problem. So I cut acrylic pipes with my Dremel and I forgot I slipped, and I was like, well, I can redo this bend, it's just a simple 90. And because these are fairly deep, I'm worried that they may not seal against the O-ring. So this is why I keep all of my scraps. This is one of my 90-degree bends that didn't work out, and you can see I slipped again right there, so clearly I've got old man hands or something. So I was like, well, this could come in handy somewhere else. So it is. Now I'm just gonna mark it with a Sharpie, and then I'm gonna cut another 90, and then that 90 can now be used in place of this one. So keep your scraps, especially if the bends are wrong, you never know where you can use them somewhere else. I know some people are like, what the hell are you doing, Jay? Dremels make such ugly cuts. Yeah, I agree, but they're faster than dealing with a stupid hacksaw. You just take your deburring kit, or deburring tool, which by the way, this tool does not work well on PTG. This is very much so an acrylic tool. PTG, it'll just chatter and skip. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I have an idea. I need to be able to have these in position for paint. So I think what I'm gonna do, because I've got a bajillion of these glue sticks, is I'm just gonna drill a bunch of small holes and stick these in there like pegs so that I can then be like that. I'm a drill bitch.
For anyone asking, that's his iFixit kit. It's not sponsored, but his wife got it for him on Father's Day.
Do you just love saying that over and over because I point it out every time?
Yeah.
Phil, we should have a talk after work today.
What?
It's weird. Look at that, it's walking. Okay, let me get a different board. This one's been sitting over there for a while. Comments gonna be like, you could have saved all that time by just buying black tube. Ah, yes, but point of this was also to show you how you can improvise.
What, buy the right pieces? That's boring.
No one does that around here.
No.
And then while we're waiting for all that to dry, I'm gonna start getting some of this wiring in here. So you get the combs on the bend before the radius and right after it, and then it will keep it. Yeah, that carbon was the right move. And if I did this right, and they're upside down, yes, they are right. So I had to get the colors to sort of line up when they're upside down, right? So it's black, gray, carbon, 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 gray, black. So when they're in the right position, they line up and match that. And I think I could have actually ordered these like combed together, but again, I didn't want to do that because this power supply is going to be used for other things. So we're going to use this bottommost drive mount, which you can see has a thermal pad on the bottom, touching a metal plate, and then this one on the top touching a metal plate. I'm not sure actually how well this cooling works, to be honest, but we can't use their active cooling one. I already showed you why, because it interferes with that. But what we're going to do to try and make sure we get the best transfer possible is you have to remove the label, because this is a metal label, as you can see. And so with the way that it's mounted like this label was on the bottom, which would mean this would be acting like an insulator rather than allowing us to transfer heat. M.2 performance is 100% dependent on temperature, just so almost sort of like a GPU boost. The colder it is, the faster it goes. And if you start doing a lot of read writes and stuff on it, you're gonna start noticing pretty quickly that you lose drive performance fairly quickly. Look at the texture I got on that. With me having this bit of a sparkly effect to it, I'm hoping this will catch some of the light. We're not doing a lot of light in this build. We're just using the ambient light from the fans. And so, as such, we want it to catch whatever light we can. I'm actually pleasantly surprised at how well that worked out. But what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take the tape off this since we're completely dry. And I love this engine enamel. It dries so fast, especially if you can get it in the sun because it's designed to get hot. What I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna take a rag like this and I just sort of wipe off like some of the dust that, I call it dust, that dusting effect that doesn't stick. That way we can just get it nice and smooth. You can kind of see a little bit on the rag right there. So we just do this a few times. You can use a microfiber cloth. Just don't push hard. There's no reason to push hard. You just want it to lightly come off. I can't remember where I learned about dusting technique, but it's just something I've done ever since I was a kid when it comes to painting model cars and anything you want to have sort of a matte look to it. It's perfect. Like the paint stopped right where the O-ring bottomed out. I was like, yes, got lucky. Let's just face it, that's not skill, that's luck. The collar made a little bit of a scratch on this one, but that's all right.
No, redo it, the whole thing. Ruined it.
Redo the whole build from scratch?
The whole build. AMD has to recut the wafer.
Go all the way back to the manufacturing process of every part.
They have to remine the rocks for the silicon.
The problem is I'm not gonna wanna take this apart. I'm not gonna wanna take it apart. It's so much work. Not to take it apart, but to put it together, and so I don't wanna do that again. You always wanna kind of twist the tube a little bit too as you're putting it in, so you're not just slicing the O-ring, you can kind of get it to sort of, I guess, give by just rotational force. I was worried that these black fittings were gonna look weird, but no, with the black tubes, it's just gonna look so right. And that's a matter of preference, right?
Whole PC building, right? It's a matter of preference.
Well, performance is matter of fact, but how much performance a person needs or aesthetic or whatever, that's all preference. I know it's crooked, I haven't straightened it out yet.
But Jay, that's crooked. Why is that crooked? It looks stupid.
You know, you're hurting my feelings. Okay, not entirely intentional, but the texture I made that tube matches the case. We are smart. Ow. Every subscriber helps me pay my health insurance costs. That looks so good. Way better than I had anticipated. Why do I have extra collars? Wait. So here's the G.Skill Trident Trident Z Neo RAM, which has the white top. And even if we make this glow white, remember, a lot of people said change your fans if you want to be blacked out, but the fans are a source of lighting. We're not putting any strips in here, and I think it's gonna be plenty. I still have a rear 120 to put back in here. But the problem with the RAM is I feel like that was gonna be a little bit clashy. Well, I mean, it's no surprise that this build is sponsored by Corsair as well, and they sent us over 32 gigs of the Dominator Platinum RGB Blackout Edition, or Black Edition. And I mean, can that possibly fit this build any better? Look, the texture even matches the tubes. See? Dude, that's gonna look. Ugh.
I thought you were gonna make this my editing rig when you were done.
Nah, that ain't working this time, buddy. This was not planned for you. Okay, that RAM is like,
Oh my God, that looks...
oh my goodness. Okay, so gotta wire it up now. There's nothing exciting to talk about there, so how about we just wire it up.
Okay, and
then Phil can do his thing.
okay.
Now it's all pretty and stuff. I think Phil did a pretty good job at showing you just how good it looks. So we're kind of doing some temperature testing right now just to see, because this is our first time doing anything with the HydroX stuff. And adding in the second 240 was obviously the right choice, not just for additional cooling headroom, which is never a problem, but just for balancing out the build in terms of where the piping and stuff is. Now, right now we're overclocking via precision boost to 1.12 or 4.125-ish. You can see right here, it's sort of bouncing around at the 4.1 all core, but we're doing it at 69 degrees or so. We'll hit 70 for a second, but we're doing it at about 69 to 70 degrees. Same thing with Cinebench. Obviously a lot better than an AIO. That CPU block is clearly making good contact. It's got plenty of flow too. You can still see some of the micro bubbles kind of going through it. It's not completely bled. As you can see, there's micro bubbles all over the reservoir. But if you look at the block, you can just, oh, I touched the glass, oh man. But you can see the bubbles going. So we've clearly got a really good amount of glow going there, or flow and glow, yeah. One of the things we love about this block is just the way the downfire of lighting is. It's not just an illuminated block. You get this amazing glow around it. It's got this sort of like I was calling it like this Dark Knight theme, but that feels more like Iron Man, like Tony Stark kind of a deal, like his arc reactor in his chest. But temperatures, I mean, we just hit 71. So 95 is our limit. We've got 24C headroom while overclocked. We already know that we can't go really any farther than like 4.2 with manual overclocking. Clearly it's doing the job, and as soon as we stop the test, the temps just come skyrocketing downward.
Ground rocketing?
Ground rocketing, like my Kerbal flight paths. But yeah, it comes down to about 1.5 degrees per second. So what we have to do now though is obviously we have to test GPU temperature. So to do that, we're just gonna go ahead and run 3D Mark, and we're gonna see what our GPU temperatures end up being. We gotta do a small overclock to our GPUs first. So I can kind of show you this live right now because we have Afterburner showing us our overclock for our CPU right here, 4.225 on most cores. But look at the temperatures here. 50C on the GPU, edge temp 65 to 62. It's bouncing around obviously on junction temp. So that's the hottest part of the die. This is the coolest part. But look at our temp, look at our score, or our GPU clock. It's staying so much higher towards 2100. Now this is GT2 of TimeSpy Extreme, so we are pushing this as hard as we possibly can. In the first test, we saw this staying much closer to 2100 the entire time. And that flickering you're seeing, we think it's our cable. It's been bent a bunch. So I would say these temperatures, 51C and 64, are pretty good. Well, there it is, a three-parter to bring you not the most custom build I've ever done, but definitely one I'm most proud of, I think, because what this showed is not just doing a sponsored build for MSI and Corsair to kind of see how these parts would all sort of, I mean, this was my idea. I reached out to them and said, hey, here's a sponsored build idea, and they sent me the parts and we did it. But what I really learned with this build is, one, sometimes what may seem like a bad idea isn't always. Like the painting of the tubes, for 7 years, I told Phil this off camera, for 7 years I had been suggested to paint tubes over and over and over again by people. And I'm always like, no, painting is gross. And I've said it 100 times already in this series. I think that turned out phenomenal. Sure, I could have just bought black tubing. I could have just bought the black tubes and bent it and stuff. Why? I don't know how much the dynamic of the black would change if you heat it and bend it, like the carbon style tubes that are already available at places like performance PCs and stuff. But the fact that we bent it first and painted it later meant that there was no change in texture or anything like that. Because as you heat it and you're touching it, you could assume change the texture. The other thing too is how simple, basic little mods can make a huge, huge difference. For instance, the edge of the PCB, by even just a Sharpie, which was not my ideal method of doing it. I personally would have used like a paint pen, that kind of you push down and the paint will flow out and then just draw on it. The Sharpie would not have been my first pick, but it still looks so much better than the bare orange PCB that would have been visible. That would have been a huge detraction from the aesthetics of this build. The other thing is simple things like painting the bracket that's on the reservoir. Remember, those are the only real custom things we did here, was just paint. We're talking about $16 worth of engine enamel from, I don't even think it's enamel, but engine paint from VHT and AutoZone, a Sharpie, and some time. So this kind of shows you just how good a build can look without having to go extremely over the top. If somebody replicated this build by just using out-of-the-box parts and didn't do any of those customizations, I guarantee you the shiny bracket up front would look terrible, the orange PCB would look terrible, and clear tubing. I took some pictures of what this looked like when it was clear. In fact, here's what it looks like. I'll have Phil put it up on screen. It's such a different look and feel. Sure, the tubes looked great, but blacking them out completely tied in the whole theme. And I also played around with some of the colors. Now, this is where RGB definitely shines. But I was like, well, wait a minute, the older Batman, not the newer Dark Knight, but like the Michael Keaton Batman was black with the yellow, logo and all that sort of stuff. So we played around with some of the IQ settings in Corsair and changed some of the CPU block to gold or yellow, and it didn't work right. But the cool thing was, because we didn't do anything crazy with the color theme on the cables, and they're completely monochromatic and they would fit any theme, I could just simply change the lighting and have a blue build today, have a red build tomorrow, have a rainbow puke build, have a 70s disco build, whatever. And, I mean, it's one of those things where, like I said before, I think we're all a little sick and tired of the marketing behind RGB, but the flexibility RGB gives you in terms of color theming, if done right like this, it's nice. But I personally like just the white the way it is. We added a little bit of yellow to it to warm the tone just a little bit, and then brought down some of the opacity, or brightness in this case, to what you see here. So there you go, guys. Dark Knight is done. We have zero use for it, but I don't think I'm gonna tear it apart right away. This to me is kind of like the mainstream edition of what we did for Threadripper, where I fell in love with that build. I never even used it, but I refused to take it apart because of what it represented. It was representative of AMD's triumphant return to the extreme CPU industry. And this to me represents what AMD's promise is to the consumers, to say, hey, we're still here and we're competitive. And that's exactly what I think this build represents. So if you would change something with this build, what would it be? Sound off in the comments below and let me know. As always, a huge thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this build, Corsair, MSI, and AMD. Without their support, I wouldn't have even had these parts to do this build. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one. FarmersOnly.com, because city folks just don't get it.